Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I'm going to do a quick preview of the astrological events taking place in the week starting on Monday, February the 3rd, 2025. And my preview is going to be brief. I'm just going to be looking at the main astrological events, and many of these events I will go into in much greater detail in my daily horoscopes over the course of next week. Having done that preview, I want to consider this plane crash in Philadelphia on Friday. So we just had this crash in Washington, D.C. Then shortly afterwards, we had a plane crash in Philadelphia. It's a small plane. I think it was going to Mexico. It was a medical evacuation plane. And, we do have a time for this accident, so I thought I would set up the chart and see if there was anything going on. And finally, I am going to do an I Ching reading for the week. This I Ching reading will be about the week as a whole, and it will be divided into 4 sections: general, money, career, and then relationships. But first, let's look at what's happening this week. So here is the chart for midnight on Monday, February the 3rd, set for New York. And one thing one might notice is that Venus is very much at the end of Pisces. So that means that Venus is getting ready to move into Aries, and in fact, it's not until Tuesday that movement happens. So Tuesday we get this change. Venus moving from Pisces to Aries. Now, you could say that is not a great change because Venus in Pisces is exalted. It's good. It's a good place for Venus, though the last degrees of Pisces are somewhat problematic because of the placement of this fixed star Skeet. So Skeet is a fixed star connected with accidents and disasters, and so it's difficult for Venus. And additionally, Venus is conjunct Neptune, so Venus is a bit nebulous. And when it moves into Aries, Venus is just much more definite. Though Venus is in its detriment in Aries. Venus rules Libra, therefore, by definition, it doesn't work so well in Aries. Venus is supposed to be a benefic. It's supposed to be a pleasant planet. It's about relationships, and Venus in Aries, a sign ruled by Mars, might be a person who is behaving inappropriately. They're being too pushy, too keen to get their way. So that might be one way in which Venus manifests. Now, Venus is not going to be in a poor position throughout its time in Aries, because the sun will eventually move into Pisces. And so when the sun moves into Pisces, that means that Venus and the sun are in mutual reception by exaltation. Though I should also say that Venus is starting to slow down. Soon enough, Venus will go retrograde, but I'll be talking about that next week. Another aspect we've got at the beginning of a week is Mercury trine Jupiter. So Mercury is in Aquarius and it's trine Jupiter in Gemini. This aspect I would regard as being fortunate. It allows us to express ourselves, and it has a certain optimism to it. Mercury is the way we think. And so if Mercury, this thinking planet, is trine Jupiter, that means perhaps that we can have positive thoughts. Things may be getting better. That might be how we feel. And this is perhaps further emphasized by the fact that on Tuesday, the same day that Venus goes into Aries, Jupiter is stationary direct. So Jupiter's been going retrograde. And with Jupiter going retrograde, it has put Jupiter, this planet of hope and optimism, and about growth, and it's been retrograde. It's been in Gemini, a sign the sign of its detriment, but finally Jupiter's position is really starting to improve now, with Jupiter going direct. And this might be a time, for example, when we need to look at what's happening with with the economy and the markets. The markets have continued to be pretty rocky, and so with Jupiter moving direct, maybe this is a time when we can start to be more optimistic. And then Jupiter will gather speed, and then in June Jupiter will move into Cancer, the sign of its exaltation. And that's another thing that I will be discussing next week. Now, we've just had a new moon. Well, we had a new moon on when did we have a new moon? We had a new moon on January the 29th. And on Wednesday the 5th, we have the first quarter moon. And so the first quarter moon is where we start to get a real feel for the lunar cycle and how the lunar cycle is unfolding. And first quarter is, arguably the time when the cycle really starts to manifest itself, often in a positive way. And maybe we can start to see the future. And we've got the first quarter moon taking place just after Jupiter goes stationary direct. So we might get a clear idea about what we're supposed to be doing. Then Thursday, the sun moves on, and the sun is at around 17 Pisces. So that means that on Thursday the sun is semi-sextile Saturn. Sun semi-sextile Saturn is a somewhat difficult aspect. The sun is how we try to express ourselves, and if it's semi-sextile Saturn, there might be something in our way, something is blocking us. We can't express ourselves in the way we would like to. Now, it's not like Sun opposition Saturn or Sun square Saturn. The Sun semi-sextile is a little more subtle than that, and it's maybe something we have to work on. And so with Sun semi-sextile Saturn, we perhaps have to exercise some self-discipline, and it's just not enough to have a good idea. We have to work on that good idea and also incorporate the reality around us, and that might be the emotional reality. Then next weekend we have the Sun making a conjunction to Mercury. In other words, Mercury is combust, and Sun-Mercury conjunctions can be a little bit difficult because Mercury represents the way we're thinking, and it can be about our objectivity, trying to think independently, particularly when Mercury is in Aquarius. But the Sun can blot it all out. Mercury literally gets burnt up. Now, some people might say that it's fortunate when Sun conjuncts Mercury because it's cazimi. So if the Sun and Mercury are, 17 arc minutes within an orb, there's only less than 17 arc minutes between each other, there is a cazimi conjunction. And some say that's fortunate, but honestly, in my experience, it's not particularly fortunate. There can be a certain lack of objectivity over the weekend. But hard work might be rewarded because Mars is making a trine to Saturn. Now, that Mars trine Saturn, if you focus on the trine, you say, well, Mars, effort, energy, Saturn, discipline. You focus on a trine, so you put in the work and you get the result. You might also say, on the other hand, that Mars and Saturn are two malefics. They're in trine. All that means is they're in aspect. And so could work either way, that Mars-Saturn trine, and certainly at the end of next week I will be looking in detail at that aspect. Then we have the plane crash. So this plane crash took place on Friday, and I get it at 6:06 p.m. So here is the chart for the crash. So it took place in Philadelphia, and at 6:06 p.m. It took place just after it took off. And it wasn't like sort of a big civilian airliner crashing. 6 people were killed, but of course it's a tragedy, and people were injured on the ground. And the idea of death is very much coded into this chart. There is a moon conjunct Saturn here. There's the moon, and the 8th house cusp. I'm using the Placidus house system. So if you use the Placidus house system, you see that the 8th house cusp is at 1454 Pisces, and moon is at 1425 Pisces. So moon is exactly on the 8th house cusp, and the moon is associated with death. And as far as the deaths are concerned, there was a crew, there were doctors on board, there was a sick child, and her mother. I think it was a girl who was sick, flying to Mexico, and that might relate to the moon. The fact that there was a child on board. I mean, I know that there were children, orphan children on board when planes crash. But this flight was all about that child. And the moon was on the 8th, and yes, it was going to a conjunction of Saturn. So you could say that moon conjunct Saturn is a classic significator of death. Additionally, we have Venus conjunct Neptune in the 8th house, and so Venus applying to the conjunction of Neptune. Now, we don't know what went wrong. I suppose we had this crash a couple of days earlier, with this helicopter in Washington, D.C., and it was at a time when you had the Venus-Neptune conjunction, and close to the North Node, and reasonably close to Skeet, and it does seem to be a little bit confusing. Venus is about relationships. Venus is about how you relate to people, how you perhaps relate, in the case of Washington, D.C., to air traffic control. That might be how Venus is working. But we do have this Pisces emphasis in this chart, and I don't think that Venus conjunct Neptune was particularly helpful. Turning to the midpoints, there are a couple of midpoints that are worth noting. So remember, when I'm talking about a midpoint, I'm talking about a planet making a semisquare or a sesquiquadrate to a midpoint. And one of the midpoints I do look at involves a hypothetical planet. Just to show you the hypothetical planet I'm particularly thinking about, that hypothetical planet is Hades. So Hades is at, there's Hades. Hades is at 1322 Cancer. And so Hades is a planet of death, and I'll be looking at Hades in a moment, just to remind you where that planet is. So, turning to the 90-degree dial, and this is about the time and the place. We want to know something personal about this chart, about its location, and then we would perhaps think about the midheaven. So the midheaven is about that particular location, and if we put the midheaven on the arrow, just to see what sort of the axis of symmetry is of the midheaven. So there's the midheaven, and you can see that the midheaven is on the Mercury-Uranus midpoint. So that's one aspect of what's going on. Mercury-Uranus is sudden news. I mean, it's not a bad midpoint combination, midheaven on a Mercury-Uranus midpoint. It's just something happens. There's news. There's something to talk about. The news might be good or it might be bad. But the midpoint I'm especially thinking about is the Saturn Hades midpoint. So midheaven on the Saturn Hades midpoint is quite grim. Saturn is about restriction. It's about perhaps a feeling of melancholy. And when you put Hades next to it, you perhaps think about death, and then you put the midheaven on the Saturn-Neptune midpoint, and then you throw in the Mercury-Uranus midpoint. So you could say midheaven on the Mercury-Uranus, you have news. And what is that news about? That news is about death. So that's a way of looking at it. And Hades is the planet of death, or one of the planets of death, a planet that can be associated with death. And so if we put the pointer on Hades, so there's Hades. You can see that a sort of cross, a sort of a part of a circle with a cross in it. And of course, that cross relates to the fact that it's about cemeteries. That's how I think the symbol was initially constructed. But the point is, this Hades is exactly on the Sun-Moon midpoint. It is making a what I think is a sesquiquadrate to the Sun-Moon midpoint. So the Sun-Moon midpoint just tells you about what's happening. Sun-Moon is a really important midpoint. It's a masculine and a feminine. It's a positive and a negative. And when you see any planet on the Sun-Moon midpoint in a natal chart, any type of chart, that planet in a way becomes prominent. And the orb of Hades on the Sun-Moon midpoint is very tight. It's just 0 degrees arc minutes. 0 degrees and 3 minutes. So that's pretty much as close as it can get. So there is a Hades feel to this event, and I don't think there's much more to say about this crash. So I will now look at today from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So with the I Ching, as always, if you don't want your I Ching done, you don't have to have it done. This only relates to people who want their I Ching done. If you just stop the video now, this I Ching simply doesn't apply to you. And with this I Ching, it has 4 sections. I'll be firstly giving a general reading, then looking at money, and then career, and then relationships. So I asked the question, what is the week starting on Monday, February the 3rd, going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 35, which is progress. And there are no moving lines here. And because there are no moving lines, this might indicate that this week may not actually be especially eventful. And it doesn't matter what the hexagram is, whether it's progress or if it had been something more difficult, like, I don't know, sickness, difficulty at the beginning, whatever. It doesn't matter. The point is there are no moving lines. So don't have high expectations about this week, in a good or a bad sense, because it just may be that nothing much is going on. And progress it's a good hexagram, and it still does indicate that we can make progress. Is it saying that we're going to reach our destination? Quite possibly not. So it might be a week where there aren't necessarily any tangible results. We just move forward steadily. And with progress, it's often a good idea to be aware of structures of authority. If we are working with other people, if other people have authority over us, then in a way we can benefit from that. And one thing that I Ching says about progress is we get an audience 3 times. So when it's talking about an audience, I suppose you think about an interview, or someone in authority takes us seriously, and they may be prepared to give us 3 audiences. I'm not saying that's literally going to happen, but that's the idea. And if we do our job well, we will be we will be respected, and if we're in a position of power, then if we can use our power responsibly, then we will be rewarded by the obedience of the people under us. So everything is working pretty well, and it's very important not to be in too much of a hurry, because as I've just said, you're not going to get immediate results this week. Okay, you might, but I don't think you will. I don't think you can certainly count on it. And we just need to let things happen in their own quiet way. And in many cases, it's going to be about some outside force, someone else giving us responsibilities, someone else giving us a break, but we mustn't be in a hurry for it. Just let things happen, at their own pace. Now, because we have a locked hexagram, a hexagram with no moving lines, it's a good idea to look at the nuclear hexagram, because the nuclear hexagram represents the underlying energy. It's not the answer, but it's giving us the background. And the nuclear hexagram is obstruction. And this is not what the week is about, but it's like what we're coming from. It's the underlying picture. Obstruction is about not making progress. It's about not being able to move forward. If we try to move forward, things move from bad to worse. If possible, maybe in this kind of situation, we should be in retreat. So we may be coming into the week with a certain amount of negativity, feeling a little bit stuck. And that's as bad as it gets, because with progress, it suggests that help is at hand, and that we are moving perhaps from a rather difficult position to a position really which is much better, when we can maybe count on other people to see us through, and yes, we can make progress. Turning to money, the situation is certainly good with progress. If you have financial concerns, then it does seem that over the course of a week you have a chance to address them. But because it's a locked hexagram, that does not indicate that the money is going to appear this week. I mean, it might, but you certainly can't count on it. It's rather improving your position, making yourself more fortunate through your actions and through the way you treat other people. So if you are relying on someone else's actions or decisions to give you the money you're looking for, then be patient. It's not a time to be pushy, but if you are patient, you can make good progress. And in terms of financial planning and financial organization, then it seems that you will indeed make progress. And if you're patient, you'll be giving yourself the best chance of success. Because, as I said, if you make financial demands this week, then that's not going to work. It's going to backfire. But I don't think you will. So this gives you an opportunity to perhaps overcome some kind of difficulty, remembering that the nuclear hexagram for progress is obstruction. This is not what this week is about, obstruction, but it's more that in terms of your attitude to money, you may feel that just something hasn't been moving as it should have been, and you might have felt a bit stuck, but finally this week you can start to make some progress. And if you're looking for a sum of money, okay, you might not get it this week, but you might get it next week. I mean, I'm not making any guarantees, but through your actions, and you will be noticed. And maybe if you're trying to get someone to listen to you in terms of your financial demands, this is a week when they will listen to you, because the I Ching talks about having an audience 3 times. That suggests someone is ready to at least listen to your grievance, whatever that might be. So financially, I'm not saying it's going to be windfalls this week or you're even going to get the money, but you are certainly going to make progress. And then there is career and business, and again, progress. You will make progress. You're not necessarily going to achieve huge things, but in terms of making progress, it's very important to be aware of power structures and hierarchies. So if you are reliant on another person, if you're working for someone, for example, or if you have your own business and you have clients to be concerned about, then to an extent it might be a good idea to accept your position, and where you stand in the hierarchy. I mean, it might not feel particularly good to be in a lower position than another person, but that might just be the way it is. And if you do what you're told, I mean, that might not be what you want to do, but if you are working for someone else, or you're doing a work for someone else, if you're self-employed, try to be obedient and try to follow instructions. And if you are obedient and you are trustworthy, then your attitude will be noticed and you will make progress. It'll be slow progress. Remember, this is a locked hexagram. It's not moving anywhere. But in terms of work and career, by the end of a week, I would have said you will be in a better position than at the beginning of the week. And if you are in a position of authority, you have people working for you or working under you, then you'll have a good relationship with your subordinates. And part of the reason you'll have a good relationship is because you have the right attitude, you have a constructive attitude, you're not into your ego, you're not into throwing your weight around. And so do consider where you are in the hierarchy and work with that. Respect the people you're working for, respect the people who are working under you, and then I think over the week there will be good progress. And finally, there's relationships. In terms of relationships, it's not going to be a spectacular week. How can it be a spectacular week? Because we have a hexagram which is locked, no moving lines. There's no great movement, but it is progress. You will make progress with other people. You can get on with people very well. You can form new relationships in a slow kind of way, and your actions can encourage people to want to get closer to you, but in a slow way, and you can boost your reputation. But again, nothing spectacular, but things are moving. And if we think about the previous, sorry, not the previous hexagram, but the nuclear hexagram, the hexagram underlying 35 progress, which is 39 obstruction, that might indicate that you feel that you're coming from a situation where maybe certain relationships were not really working. They seemed to be a bit stuck. Where were things going? No one was moving. It wasn't very productive, and perhaps you're coming into this week, wondering whether things are actually going to move. But with progress, they're certainly going to move slowly, and don't try and force the pace. Under any circumstances, it's not appropriate, and it's not going to work. Whatever that relationship is about, and I'm not necessarily talking about romance or marriages or anything. It can just be short-term relationships, which may be necessary right now. You and someone else have got a common goal. That kind of relationship, you can create a good understanding. And maybe that's actually what it's about with progress. It's you and someone else coming to an understanding slowly and having a respect for each other and just not forcing the pace. And that, I think, really is important. If you don't force the pace and you accept the times in which we're living, then that is the right approach. And I have to say, from a relationship perspective, this week Venus is moving into Aries. Venus is the planet of relationships, and when it's moving into Aries, it's moving into the sign of its detriment. So Venus's position is actually quite weak, and so it seems that with progress, this locked hexagram, we are kind of accepting the fact that nothing dramatic is going to happen with relationships, but it is not a time for being pushy. I mean, Venus in Aries kind of wants to be pushy, wants to set the pace, but that's not appropriate. And so if we just accept the situation, we're not in a hurry, then the various relationships we're in or the various relationships we get involved in over the course of a week should work reasonably well. They should improve, but don't expect anything spectacular. And that's it. That's all I'm going to say in this short video. I hope you found this video of some use. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I would be extremely grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a copy, there is a link in the description. And I will talk to you again very soon.